My name is Eliza Kincaid. I'm 32 years old, and I live in a small apartment in Portland where the rain taps against my windows almost every morning. Each day begins the same way: strong black coffee, hair twisted into a messy bun, and 20 minutes at my kitchen island reviewing reports before heading to the office. Some people find comfort in routine. I find power in it. I'm the CEO of Meridian Manufacturing, a mid-sized industrial equipment company specializing in custom fabrication for the renewable energy sector. When people ask what I do, I usually just say, I run a business. It sounds simpler that way. The reality is more complicated. It's analyzing market trends, making difficult personnel decisions, and building relationships with clients who expect perfection. Despite everything that happened, I love it. But if you asked my father, he'd tell you I was never supposed to be here. At least that's what he believed for years. My father, James Kincaid, built Meridian from scratch when he was just 26. He transformed a small welding shop into a regional manufacturing powerhouse through grit, calculated risk, and unyielding standards. In our hometown of Oak Ridge, the Kincaid name meant something. It meant reliability, success, and a certain kind of uncompromising excellence. I grew up hearing stories about my father's business acumen. James Kincaid could negotiate the skin off a snake, they'd say. Man's got steel for bones and a calculator for a heart. At home, he was exactly as advertised: disciplined, demanding, and fixated on legacy. Our dinner conversations revolved around profit margins and expansion strategies. While other kids had bedtime stories, I had case studies in business management. My childhood was measured in achievement: perfect grades, student council president, summer internships at the company starting at age 15. My father didn't praise these accomplishments. He expected them. Kincaid's lead, he'd remind me. We don't follow and we don't fail. And then there was my younger sister, Rebecca, 3 years my junior, brilliant in her own right, but softer somehow. Where I was analytical, she was artistic. Where I calculated, she created. She painted, wrote poetry, and dreamed of studying literature at expensive private colleges on the East Coast. My father watched her creative pursuits with quiet confusion, like he was trying to solve a particularly complex equation. She'll grow out of it, he'd say to my mother when he thought I couldn't hear. Can't have the Kincaid name attached to something so impractical. I never resented Rebecca. How could I? She was authentic in a way I was still learning to be. While I was mapping out business strategies, she was mapping out her soul. We were different, but we understood each other. She'd help me choose colors for presentation slides. I'd help her calculate the costs of art supplies against her allowance. Balance of a sort. By my senior year of high school, everything was going according to plan. I had been accepted to the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business, my father's alma mater. My college fund, which he'd been building since my birth, would cover the entire cost. I had already completed 3 substantial internships at Meridian. I was on track to follow in his footsteps, just as he had always planned. Then came the accident. A rainy night, a truck driver who fell asleep at the wheel, and suddenly our perfectly ordered world tilted on its axis. My father survived, but barely. 3 months in the hospital, 2 major surgeries, and a long, painful rehabilitation. The company faltered without his leadership. Bills mounted. Insurance covered most, but not all. I remember the day clearly. April 17th, a Sunday afternoon. My father called me into his home office where he was still working from a specialized chair that accommodated his healing body. Maps of pain etched his face, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating. Eliza, he said, his voice steady despite everything. We need to make some adjustments to our plans. I stood straighter, ready for whatever challenge he was about to present. I'd been helping at the company since his accident, postponing college applications, stepping up in ways that made me believe I was finally proving my worth. "Your college fund," he continued. "We need to reallocate it." I blinked, not fully understanding at first. Reallocate? "We're giving it to Rebecca, for Barnard. She received her acceptance letter yesterday." The world didn't stop. There was no dramatic pause, no swell of music to indicate the significance of the moment. Just the soft tick of the clock on his desk and the sudden hollow feeling in my chest. "But what about Wharton?" I asked, my voice embarrassingly small. He shifted in his chair, discomfort flashing across his face. Whether from physical pain or the conversation, I couldn't tell. "You've always been the practical one," he said. "The strong one. You can handle community college for 2 years, then transfer. Or take out loans like I did. Rebecca, she's different. More fragile. This opportunity is everything to her." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just nodded and asked if he needed anything before I left for my evening shift at the local hardware store, the job I'd taken to help with household expenses while he recovered. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my Wharton acceptance letter, still pinned to my bulletin board. The feeling that washed over me wasn't just disappointment. It was clarity. Cold, hard clarity that shaped everything that followed. I didn't tell anyone about my parents' decision. Not my friends, not my teachers, not even Rebecca. Especially not Rebecca. This wasn't her fault. She didn't ask for my future to be traded, for hers. The night after my conversation with my father, she burst into my room, eyes bright with excitement, waving her Barnard acceptance letter. "Can you believe it, Eliza? New York City, literature and art and everything I've dreamed about." Her happiness was so pure, so uncomplicated. I hugged her tightly and told her I was proud. And I was. That part wasn't a lie. When she asked about Wharton, I shrugged casually and said I was reconsidering my options. "I might stay local for a while," I told her. "Help Dad with the company. During recovery." Her face clouded momentarily. "But you've worked so hard for this. Dad always said you were destined for Wharton." "Plans change," I said, keeping my voice light. "Besides, there's more than one path to success." Later that week, I sat down with my guidance counselor, Mr. Fernandez. He stared at me in disbelief when I told him I wouldn't be attending Wharton. "Eliza, this doesn't make sense. You're our top student. You've been planning this your entire high school career." I maintained eye contact, kept my voice steady. "I'm exploring alternative pathways. Perhaps Oak Ridge Community College for 2 years, then transfer." He leaned forward, concern etched across his face. "Is this a financial issue? Because there are scholarships, grants." "It's a personal decision," I interrupted. "I'd appreciate your support." The disappointment in his eyes was almost harder to bear than my father's clinical calculus. Mr. Fernandez had believed in me, had written glowing recommendations, had stayed after hours to review my essays. Now he thought I was throwing it all away. "Will you at least apply for the local business scholarship? It's $5,000. Not enough for Wharton, but it would cover most of your expenses at OCC." I nodded, not because I wanted his charity, but because I needed him to stop looking at me like I was breaking his heart. That spring unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. I watched my classmates celebrate their college acceptances, plan dorm decorations, and talk excitedly about orientation. I smiled through Rebecca's shopping trips for her new life in New York, helped her choose bedding and winter coats, pretended not to notice when my mother slipped her extra spending money for emergencies. Meanwhile, I applied to Oak Ridge Community College's business program and took on more hours at the hardware store. I also increased my involvement at Meridian, coming in after my other job to help with inventory management and customer follow-ups. The administrative staff treated me with a mixture of pity and impatience, the boss's daughter playing at business while her sister got the golden ticket. Graduation day arrived with its predictable pageantry. As valedictorian, I stood at the podium looking out at a sea of expectant faces. My father sat in the audience, still using a cane, my mother beside him dabbing at proud tears. Rebecca beamed from the second row, already wearing a Barnard sweatshirt despite the June heat. I had prepared a speech about futures and potential, about dreams and determination. Standard inspirational fare. But standing there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, everything that was still to come, I set my written remarks aside. The most valuable lesson I've learned, I told my classmates, isn't found in textbooks. It's that life rarely follows your carefully constructed plans. Success isn't about the prestige of where you go or what others expect of you. It's about how you respond when the path you thought was yours suddenly disappears. From the corner of my eye, I saw my father shift uncomfortably. Good. Starting tomorrow, we all face new challenges. Some of us are heading to Ivy League universities. I paused, letting the statement hover. Others are taking different routes. What matters isn't the name on your acceptance letter, but your willingness to build something meaningful wherever you land. The applause that followed was enthusiastic, if slightly confused. Later, at our modest backyard reception, several parents approached me to say how mature my perspective was, if only they knew. Summer passed in a blur of 12-hour days split between the hardware store and Meridian. I established a routine. Up at 5, hardware store from 7 to 3, Meridian from 4 to 9, home to collapse and repeat. My father's recovery progressed slowly. He returned to the office part-time, but his legendary stamina was compromised. I often found him staring at spreadsheets, fatigue etched in the new lines of his face. One evening in early August, I was alone in the office, reviewing inventory reports that showed concerning discrepancies. We were missing materials, but the sales figures didn't account for the shortage. Either our suppliers were shorting us, or someone inside was redirecting resources. Neither possibility boded well for a company already struggling from my father's absence. I created a tracking system, cross-referencing delivery receipts with usage logs and final products. After a week of investigation, I identified the problem. Our production manager, Thomas Wells, had been falsifying reports to cover materials he was selling to a competitor. Small amounts, consistently over time, adding up to nearly $200,000. Over 2 years. Instead of taking this directly to my father, I gathered irrefutable evidence. Copies of altered reports, time-stamped security footage of after-hours activities, bank records showing suspicious deposits to Wells's account. I organized everything meticulously in a presentation folder with executive summaries and recommended actions. The night before Rebecca left for New York, I placed the folder on my father's home office desk with a simple note. We have a problem. I have a solution. Then I drove Rebecca to her goodbye dinner with high school friends, smiling through their excited chatter about college adventures awaiting them, adventures that should have included me. The next morning, my father called me into his office before I left for my hardware store shift. The folder sat open on his desk. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of concern, irritation, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Explain, he said simply, gesturing to my findings. For 30 minutes, I walked him through the evidence, my methodology, and my recommendations for both handling Wells and implementing new controls to prevent future theft. I spoke professionally, without emotion, as if I were presenting to any executive rather than my father. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, studying me with new eyes. "Why didn't you come to me immediately?" he finally asked. "Would you have believed me without evidence?" I countered. "Or would you have dismissed it as the observation of an inexperienced college girl?" The question hung between us, weighted with history. "You should have been at Wharton this fall," he said. Quietly, not quite an apology. "Yes," I agreed. "I should have." That afternoon, I was late to the hardware store because my father asked me to sit in when he confronted Wells. I watched dispassionately as the man who had stolen from our company, from my future, first denied everything, then made excuses, then finally begged to keep his job. My father looked at me, eyebrow raised in silent question. My future for yours, the gesture seemed to say. Termination, I said calmly. Immediate, and we pursue full restitution. Wells stared at me with naked hatred. Taking orders from your daughter now, James? The little princess who couldn't even get into college? My father's face hardened. You're addressing the person who caught you stealing from my company. Show some respect on your way out. It wasn't an acknowledgement of my sacrifice or an apology for his choice, but it was recognition, however small, that I belonged in that room, making those decisions. It was a beginning. That evening, we drove Rebecca to the airport. She hugged me tightly before passing through security. I'm going to make you proud, she whispered. You already do, I replied, meaning it. Just be happy. That's enough. As we watched her disappear into the crowd, my father turned to me. I've been thinking about your situation, he said carefully. Perhaps we could revisit the Wharton option for spring semester. I looked at him steadily. No. No? He seemed genuinely surprised. I've made other arrangements. My other arrangements had nothing to do with college, at least not immediately. I had developed a plan during those long summer nights, reviewing Meridian's operations while the rest of the world slept. Our company had potential that my father, focused on traditional manufacturing, couldn't see. The renewable energy sector was expanding rapidly, but Meridian was still primarily serving conventional industrial clients. We were missing a massive opportunity. I started small. Oak Ridge Community College offered night classes in business administration and accounting. I enrolled in a full course load while maintaining my punishing work schedule. During my limited, free time, I researched renewable energy trends, identifying the specific components and systems most in demand. Solar mounting systems, particularly those designed for difficult terrain or unusual building structures, represented an underserved market niche that aligned perfectly with our fabrication capabilities. My father didn't object to my continued presence at Meridian, especially after the Wells incident. He assigned me to manage inventory and streamline the ordering system, critical but unglamorous work that kept me firmly in the background. I accepted this role without complaint, using it to learn every aspect of our supply chain and production processes. 3 months into this arrangement, I approached him with a proposal. I had identified $45,000 in potential monthly savings through supplier consolidation and process improvements. The report was comprehensive, backed by data, and presented with the emotional detachment he respected. Impressive, he admitted, reviewing my findings. But implementation would require restructuring supplier relationships established over decades. Old relationships don't always equal optimal relationships, I replied. These changes would increase our margins by nearly 4% annually. He studied me over the top of his reading glasses. And you believe you could manage this transition? I know I can. Give me 60 days to prove it. After a long moment, he nodded once. 60 days, but this can't interfere with your current responsibilities. I didn't smile, didn't thank him, simply gathered my materials and left his office. This wasn't a favor. It was a business decision, and we both knew it. Those 60 days nearly broke me. I slept an average of 4 hours per night, juggling my hardware store job, college classes, regular Meridian duties, and now this additional project. I lost 12 pounds. My social life, already minimal, disappeared entirely. But I documented every phone call, every negotiation, every contract revision. I created transition timelines, contingency plans, and implementation protocols that accounted for every foreseeable complication. By day 55, I had secured new arrangements with suppliers offering superior terms and quality guarantees. The projected savings actually exceeded my initial estimate by 15%. When I presented the final results to my father, he examined everything with his typical methodical scrutiny, looking for flaws or oversights. Finding none, he leaned back in his chair and regarded me thoughtfully. "You've earned the right to implement this," he said finally. "And a proper title. How does procurement manager sound?" It wasn't a question, and we both knew it was below my capabilities. But it was also a significant step up from inventory clerk and my first official position at Meridian. More importantly, it came with a modest but real salary that would allow me to quit the hardware store. "Acceptable," I replied, matching his businesslike tone. "When do I start?" "Monday." "And Eliza?" He paused, something almost like approval flickering across his face. "Don't make me regret this." I didn't. Over the next 6 months, I overhauled our entire procurement system, creating efficiencies that improved both our bottom line and our production timelines. When suppliers balked at new terms, I remained politely immovable, making it clear that Meridian's business was valuable, but not at any price. When longtime employees complained about changing established procedures, I demonstrated how the new systems reduced their workload while improving outcomes. I didn't seek popularity, only results. Meanwhile, I continued taking night classes, maintaining a perfect GPA despite my workload. I also began quietly researching solar energy systems, focusing specifically on mounting hardware for unusual applications. Most existing systems were designed for standard rooftops or open field installations, but many potential solar clients had specialized needs: historic buildings with preservation requirements, structures with unconventional architecture, or locations with extreme weather considerations. I compiled a detailed market analysis and preliminary designs for customized mounting systems that could be manufactured using our existing equipment with minimal retooling. The projected development costs were modest, but the potential market was substantial and growing. 8 months into my role as procurement manager, I completed my presentation on diversifying into renewable energy components. The timing seemed ideal. We had just finished our most profitable quarter since before my father's accident, largely due to the efficiencies I had implemented. Rather than immediately scheduling a meeting with my father, however, I approached our lead engineer, Martin Reeves. Martin was a 20-year Meridian veteran who had seen countless ideas come and go. He was brilliant, practical, and brutally honest, exactly the reality check I needed before approaching my father. I asked for an hour of his time after regular business hours, knowing his opinion carried significant weight. "Solar mounting systems?" he said skeptically, flipping through my materials. "James has always avoided what he calls trendy markets." "This isn't trendy, it's evolving into standard infrastructure," I replied. "And our expertise in custom fabrication gives us a competitive advantage for specialized applications." For nearly 2 hours, Martin questioned every aspect of my proposal: technical specifications, material requirements, market projections, competition analysis. I answered each query directly, acknowledging limitations and uncertainties where they existed rather than overselling. By the end, his skepticism had transformed into cautious interest. "Your father won't like changing direction," he warned. "He built this company on serving traditional industries." "I'm not suggesting abandoning our existing clients," I clarified. "This would be an expansion, not a replacement. But it positions us for future growth in a rapidly developing sector." Martin nodded slowly. "The engineering is sound. The market potential exists. But you're proposing more than a new product line. You're suggesting a partial company reorientation." He gathered my materials and handed them back. "Your father won't see this as just business. He'll see it as his daughter challenging his vision." "I'm not asking for your support," I said carefully. "Just your honest assessment." He smiled slightly. You have both. This makes sense and it's well developed. But proceed carefully. He paused at the door. And Eliza? He might be more receptive if this came from someone other than you. I considered this advice seriously. Martin was right. My father might dismiss the idea simply because it originated with me, his college fundless daughter working her way up from the bottom. But having someone else present my work felt dishonest, and I refused to begin my real career at Meridian with deception. The opportunity to present my proposal came sooner than expected. The following week, a major client unexpectedly canceled a significant order due to their own financial difficulties. The loss would impact our quarterly projections and potentially require staffing adjustments. My father called an emergency management meeting to discuss contingency plans. 10 minutes before the meeting, I printed copies of my renewable energy proposal, now updated to include specific strategies for utilizing our suddenly available production capacity. I arrived early, placing the materials at each seat around the conference table, my father's copy positioned precisely at the head. When he entered, followed by our financial officer, sales director, and Martin, he noticed the unexpected documents. Immediately. "What's this?" he asked, lifting his copy. "A potential solution to our immediate capacity issue," I replied calmly, "and a strategic opportunity for long-term growth." For the next 40 minutes, I presented my comprehensive plan for entering the specialized solar mounting systems market. I outlined the minimal retooling required, the overlap with our existing expertise, the growing demand, and the projected return on investment. I addressed potential objections before they could be raised, supported every claim with market data, and concluded with a phased implementation timeline that minimized risk while providing measurable benchmarks for success. Throughout my presentation, my father remained silent, his expression inscrutable. The financial officer asked pointed questions about development costs and revenue projections. The sales director wondered about our credibility in a market where we had no established presence. Martin, true to his word, provided technical validation when engineering questions arose. When I finished, silence filled the room. Everyone looked to my father, waiting for his response. He gathered the presentation materials into a neat stack, aligning the edges with precision, a habit I had inherited from him. "This represents a significant departure from our established business model," he finally said, his voice neutral. "It represents an evolution," I countered respectfully. "One that leverages our existing strengths while positioning us for future market shifts." He looked directly at me then, his gaze penetrating. "And you developed this entirely on your own time?" "Yes," I confirmed. "It doesn't affect my regular responsibilities." Another long silence followed. Then he turned to our financial officer. "Edward, work with Eliza to develop comprehensive financial projections. I want best case, worst case, and most likely scenarios." He looked at the sales director. "Thomas, identify potential initial clients and competitive positioning." Finally, he addressed Martin. "Is this engineering viable with our current equipment and expertise?" "With minimal adjustments," Martin confirmed. "The technical approach is sound." My father nodded once. "We'll reconvene in 3 days with developed assessments. If the numbers work, we'll proceed with a limited pilot." He stood, signaling the meeting's end, then paused. "Eliza, my office, now." As the others filed out, Martin caught my eye briefly, giving a slight nod of approval. I followed my father down the hallway, maintaining a professional demeanor despite the uncertainty churning inside me. Once inside his office, he closed the door and turned to face me. "This proposal," he said without preamble, "represents hundreds of hours of work." "Yes," I acknowledged. "Hours that could have been spent on your education or your social development." I met his gaze steadily. "I made my choice after you made yours." For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face, but it vanished. So quickly I might have imagined it. The renewable energy sector is volatile, he said, changing course. Government incentives change with political winds. Supply chains are still developing. All true, I agreed. But the overall trajectory is clear. Those who establish expertise now will have advantage later, regardless of short-term fluctuations. He studied me for a long moment. You're not at Wharton, he said finally. But you're getting an education nonetheless. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a clear acknowledgement of what had happened. But coming from my father, it was something close to validation. The pilot project, I said, refocusing on business. If approved, I'd like to lead it. We'll see, he replied, neither agreeing nor refusing outright. That decision depends on the next 3 days. I understood the dismissal and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me at the door. Eliza. I looked back. This is good work, regardless of what happens next. I nodded once, not trusting myself to speak, and left his office with my composure, intact. It wasn't victory. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement, however small, that I belonged in that room, making those decisions. It was another beginning. The 3 days following my presentation were the most intense of my career at Meridian. I barely slept, working closely with Edward from finance to develop comprehensive revenue projections, meeting with Thomas to identify potential clients, and collaborating with Martin to finalize technical specifications. I maintained my regular duties simultaneously, refusing to give my father any reason to question my commitment. The morning of our follow-up meeting arrived with a nervous energy permeating the office. Word had spread about the potential new direction, creating factions among the staff, those excited about innovation versus those resistant to change. I ignored the whispers and sidelong glances, focusing instead on the final preparations for my presentation. My father arrived precisely on time, as always. The same team gathered around the conference table, now joined by our HR director, Patricia, who would need to address training requirements if the project moved forward. I distributed, updated materials and took my position at the front of the room. Based on our comprehensive analysis, I began, the renewable energy component project represents a viable opportunity with manageable risk. Edward will present the financial projections. Edward, a meticulous man in his late 50s who had handled Meridian's finances since before I was born, stood and adjusted his glasses. We've run the numbers through 3 distinct scenarios, he explained, directing everyone's attention to the spreadsheets. Even in our most conservative projection, the project achieves profitability within 14 months. The realistic scenario shows profitability at 9 months with a 22% return on investment by the end of year 2. My father studied the figures carefully. And these numbers account for potential market volatility? Yes, Edward confirmed. We've built in significant buffers and considered historical fluctuations in both the renewable sector and raw material costs. Thomas spoke next, outlining 5 potential launch clients already interested in our prototypes based on preliminary conversations. Martin followed with detailed production integration plans that would allow us to maintain existing orders while developing the new product line. Throughout these presentations, my father remained silent, his expression giving nothing away. When the others finished, all eyes turned to me for closing remarks. This isn't just about a new product line, I said calmly. It's about positioning Meridian for the next decade. Traditional industrial manufacturing isn't disappearing, but renewable infrastructure represents the growth sector. We have the expertise, the equipment, and now the opportunity to establish ourselves in this space before competition intensifies. Silence filled the room when I finished. My father tapped his pen methodically against his notepad. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. A habit that signaled deep consideration. Finally, he set the pen down with deliberate precision. We'll proceed. With the pilot, he announced. Initial investment capped at $175,000 for the first phase. Edward will establish dedicated accounting codes to track all expenses and revenue. He looked around the table. This project requires careful management by someone with comprehensive understanding of both the technical and market aspects. My heart rate increased slightly. This was the moment. Either acknowledgement of my capabilities or relegation to the background while someone else implemented my vision. Eliza will serve as project lead, he continued without hesitation. She'll report directly to me with weekly updates. Martin will provide technical oversight. Patricia, identify 2 production staff members who can be reassigned to this initiative. Thomas, convert those preliminary client conversations into firm commitments. The meeting concluded with specific assignments and deadlines. As everyone filed out, my father gestured for me to remain. When we were alone, he studied me with an intensity that reminded me of childhood piano recitals, where every note was scrutinized. "This is your project now," he said without preamble. "Success or failure lands on your shoulders." "I understand," I replied, meeting his gaze. "You'll face resistance. Some of our longest-serving employees will question your authority and this direction." "I'm aware." He nodded slightly. "You'll need to balance innovation with our established reputation for quality. Meridian didn't survive 30 years by chasing trends." "This isn't a trend," I countered respectfully. "It's an evolution." Something almost like approval flickered in his eyes. "We'll see." He gathered his materials and stood. "One more thing. You're being promoted to Director of Special Projects, effective immediately. Patricia will adjust your compensation accordingly." I maintained my composure, acknowledging this significant advancement with a simple, "Thank you." He paused at the door. "Rebecca called yesterday. She's been accepted into a study abroad program in Paris for next semester. Literary translation or some such thing." The shift in topic was jarring. I hadn't spoken to my sister in nearly 2 weeks, though we exchanged regular texts and occasional video calls. "That's wonderful," I said carefully, uncertain of his purpose in sharing this. "Your mother and I are covering the additional expenses," he added. "It's a valuable opportunity for her development." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Not quite anger, not quite resentment, something more complex. "I'm sure she'll make the most of it," I replied neutrally. He studied me for a moment longer. "You never asked why we chose her?" The directness of the statement caught me off guard. "It was clear enough," I said quietly. "You believed I could handle disappointment better than she could." "Partly," he acknowledged. "But there was more to it." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "You reminded me too much of myself. The ambition, the focus, the relentless drive. I thought you'd succeed regardless of circumstances, perhaps even because of them. Rebecca?" He paused. "Rebecca is different." "So I was punished for being like you," I observed, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. "Not punished," he corrected. "Tested, perhaps. Or challenged." He straightened his tie, a gesture that signaled discomfort with the emotional nature of our conversation. "In any case, the past is settled. Your focus should be on this project and what it means for your future at Meridian." With that, he left. The conversation terminated as abruptly as it had begun. I remained in the conference room, processing what had just occurred. The promotion was significant, director level at 23, with a project that could reshape the company's future. It represented my father's first real acknowledgement of my capabilities and potential. Yet his explanation about the college fund decision lingered uncomfortably, not quite an apology, not quite a justification, but an admission that my path had been deliberately made harder because he saw himself in me. It wasn't fair, but it contained its own twisted logic. He had built himself through adversity and believed I would do the same. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I assembled a small, dedicated team, 2 experienced fabricators, a design engineer, and a project coordinator. We established a semi-isolated production area for developing prototypes while maintaining transparent records of all expenses and progress. I worked longer hours than anyone, arriving before sunrise and often leaving well after dark. The first production prototype was completed 4 days ahead of schedule. I remember standing in the workshop, running my hand along the elegant simplicity of our mounting system. It was designed specifically for historic buildings with preservation requirements, lightweight, minimally invasive to the original structure, and adaptable to irregular surfaces. The fabricators watched nervously as I examined every weld, every connection point. "It's excellent," I told them finally, feeling genuine pride in what we'd created. "Schedule load testing for tomorrow." Word of our progress spread through the company. Some department heads began stopping by to see the prototypes, their initial skepticism gradually transforming into cautious interest. Others maintained their distance, particularly those who had been closest to my father during the company's early years. I ignored the politics, focusing instead on results. Our first client meeting exceeded expectations. Greenfield Restoration, a company specializing in converting historic buildings to modern use while preserving architectural integrity, had been struggling to find solar solutions that satisfied both energy efficiency requirements and historical preservation committees. Our custom mounting system solved both problems elegantly. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," their project manager admitted during the demonstration. "How soon can you deliver a full system for the Harrington building renovation?" I quoted a timeline that was ambitious but achievable, along with pricing that offered value while reflecting the custom nature of our solution. By the end of the meeting, we had a letter of intent for a modest but significant initial order, exactly the proof of concept we needed. When I reported this success to my father, his response was measured. "One client doesn't make a market," he cautioned. "But it's a promising start." Coming from him, this qualified approval felt like triumph. I pressed my advantage. "With this validation, we should accelerate development of the modular version for standard commercial applications. That's where the volume will be." He considered this briefly. "Proceed, but maintain the current budget constraints. Prove the concept generates sustainable revenue before we expand investment." I accepted these terms without argument, recognizing that his caution balanced my enthusiasm. This dynamic, my push for innovation tempered by his insistence on proven results, created a tension that ultimately improved our approach. Over the next 3 months, our renewable energy division, as it was now unofficially known, secured contracts with 5 additional clients. Each project was custom, each profitable, and each enhanced our reputation in this emerging sector. I documented everything meticulously, building the case for expanded investment and production capacity. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A major solar installation company, Solaris Technologies, contacted us after seeing our mounting system at a greenfield restoration project. Their engineering team had been impressed by our design solution for a particularly challenging rooftop installation. "We install systems on thousands of buildings annually," their procurement director explained during our meeting. "About 30% involve non-standard mounting challenges that drive up costs and delay installations. If your systems perform as well at scale as they do in custom applications, we'd be interested in a supplier partnership." The potential volume was staggering, possibly 10 times our current production capacity for this product line. I maintained my composure during the meeting, providing technical specifications and general pricing frameworks. But internally, my mind raced with the implications. This single relationship could transform Meridian's future and validate everything I had been working toward. Before approaching my father, I worked with our finance team to develop comprehensive growth scenarios, production capacity assessments, and capital investment requirements. I analyzed the competitive landscape, supplier relationships, and staffing implications. When my proposal was complete, I requested a formal board presentation rather than a private meeting with my father. This opportunity exceeds my individual decision authority, I explained when he questioned this approach. It requires board-level approval for the capital expenditure. He studied me for a moment, then nodded slightly. 3 days from now, 9 a.m. Be prepared for skeptical questions. I was more than prepared. When I stood before the board, 6 men and 2 women, most of whom had known me since childhood, I presented not as James Kincaid's daughter, but as Meridian's director of special projects with proven results and a vision for expansion. I detailed the Solaris opportunity, the market validation we'd already achieved, and the strategic growth path this partnership would enable. This requires a $1.2 million capital investment, I concluded, primarily for dedicated production equipment and facility modifications. Based on the minimum volume commitment from Solaris alone, ROI would be achieved in 18 months, with potential for significantly accelerated returns if additional clients follow as projected. The questioning was rigorous, but fair. Board. Members probed our production capacity, quality control measures, competitive differentiation, and contingency plans. I answered each query directly, acknowledging limitations and risks while emphasizing our demonstrated success in this market to date. Throughout the presentation, my father remained largely silent, allowing the board's financial and operations experts to lead the examination. Only near the end did he lean forward with the question I had been anticipating. "You've made a compelling case for the opportunity," he acknowledged. "But who should lead this expansion? It requires experienced management with proven ability to scale operations." The question hung in the air. Every person in that room understood its significance. Was I ready for this level of responsibility? Did I have the necessary experience to lead a major business unit? Or would someone more seasoned be brought in above me now that I had proven the concept? I met my father's gaze directly. "I've demonstrated the ability to conceptualize, launch, and grow this division from nothing to validated market success. I've built the team, the client relationships, and the technical expertise specific to these products. I should continue to lead this business unit with appropriate senior oversight until scale is achieved." Murmurs around the table suggested both agreement and skepticism. My father's expression remained impassive. After a brief discussion among the board members, they voted unanimously to approve the capital expenditure. On the matter of leadership, my father finally spoke. "Eliza will continue as Director of Renewable Energy Solutions, reporting directly to me during the expansion phase. We'll revisit organizational structure when production reaches sustainable scale." It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough, for now. I had secured the investment, maintained leadership of my division, and positioned myself for further advancement when results justified it. As the meeting concluded, several board members congratulated me on the presentation and the division's success to date. Walking back to my office afterward, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what I had accomplished, determination to justify the board's confidence, and a lingering question about whether my father's oversight role represented continued doubt about my capabilities or simply prudent management of a significant expansion. The answer came later that afternoon when he appeared in my office doorway, an unusual occurrence since he typically summoned people to him rather than venturing into their spaces. "The board was impressed," he said without preamble. As was I. "Thank you," I replied, unsure where this was heading. He stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind him. "You've built something valuable here, against significant odds and some—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Some unnecessary obstacles." The closest he had ever come to acknowledging the college fund situation. "We adapt to the circumstances we're given," I said evenly. He nodded slightly. a flicker of what might have been regret crossing his face. "The oversight role isn't about doubting your capabilities," he said, answering my unspoken question. "It's about ensuring you have the support needed during rapid scaling. Growth can break promising businesses if not managed carefully." "I understand," I said, and I did. Despite everything, I recognized the value of his experience in this critical phase. "Your sister calls you regularly?" he asked, the abrupt change of subject catching me off guard. "Yes," I confirmed. "Weekly, at least." "Good." He hesitated, then added, "She's proud of you. Mentions your work often during our calls." I felt a small warmth at this unexpected information. Rebecca and I maintained our connection despite the distance and different paths. She had never known about the college fund situation, and I had worked hard to ensure she never felt my occasional complicated emotions about her opportunities. "This expansion," my father continued, returning to business, "positions you to eventually—" He trailed off, then started again. "Your future at Meridian is secure, Eliza. Remember that as you navigate the challenges ahead." With that cryptic statement, he nodded once and left, leaving me to wonder what he had initially intended to say. Position me to eventually what? Take on larger leadership? Succeed him? The unfinished thought lingered as I turned back to the expansion plans spread across my desk. Whatever he meant, one thing was clear. I had created my own path at Meridian, built on my own terms rather than as an inheritance. And that made all the difference. The Solaris partnership transformed both Meridian Manufacturing and my position within it. Implementing a $1.2 million expansion required reconfiguring significant portions of our production facility, hiring specialized staff, and establishing new quality control protocols. I found myself regularly working 16-hour days, moving between engineering meetings, production floor troubleshooting, and financial reviews. The pressure was immense, but invigorating. Finally, I was building something truly significant. 4 months into the expansion, we delivered our first large-scale order to Solaris, 285 custom mounting systems for a major commercial installation in Denver. I personally inspected the final shipment, checking random samples for finish quality and structural integrity. As the trucks pulled away from our loading docks, I felt a quiet pride that bordered on vindication. We had met our deadline with products that exceeded specifications, the Solaris project manager called 2 weeks later. "Your system's installed in half the time we budgeted," he reported. "The adjustable mounting points worked exactly as designed, even with the irregular roof structure. Our installation team wants to know if you'll be handling all our specialized projects going forward." Word spread through the industry. Within 6 months, we had inquiries from 3 additional national solar installation companies and numerous regional contractors. Our renewable energy division expanded from 8 employees to 27, with dedicated production lines running 2 shifts. The quarterly financial reports showed the division contributing 22% of Meridian's overall revenue, with profit margins exceeding our traditional product lines. My father observed this growth with measured approval. During our weekly updates, he questioned me rigorously about quality metrics, capacity utilization, and customer feedback. His standards remained exacting, but gradually, the nature of his questions evolved from skeptical examination to forward-looking strategy. He began considering my division not as an experiment, but as a core business unit with long-term significance. "We should consider obtaining ISO 14001 certification," he mentioned during one meeting, referring to the environmental management standard. "It would align with your division's focus and potentially open additional markets." The "your division" phrasing didn't escape my notice. He was acknowledging my ownership of this business segment, subtly but significantly. I added environmental certification to our strategic priorities. Meanwhile, my personal life remained almost non-existent. I maintained my tiny apartment primarily as a place to shower and occasionally sleep. Most evenings found me at my office, reviewing designs or analyzing market trends. Weekends became extensions of weekdays. When friends from high school invited me to gatherings, I declined with vague excuses about work commitments. Rebecca returned from her semester in Paris filled with stories about literary cafes and translation workshops. She called me late one evening, her voice vibrant with excitement about a summer internship at a publishing house in New York. "It's unpaid," she admitted. "But Dad says not to worry about money. Isn't that amazing? I can focus completely on the experience." I made appropriate sounds of enthusiasm while pushing away the familiar twinge. Not jealousy exactly. I wanted her to succeed and genuinely admired her passion for literature. But the ease with which my parents supported her dreams remained a stark contrast to my own struggle. "And what about you?" she asked. "Mom mentioned something about a big new contract. Are you enjoying it?" The question caught me off guard. No one in my family had ever asked if I enjoyed my work, only if I was succeeding at it. After a moment's reflection, I realized that despite the exhaustion and pressure, I did find genuine satisfaction in what I was building. "I am," I answered honestly. "It's challenging in the right ways." "You always were the smart one," she said affectionately. "Dad's always going on about how you're revolutionizing the company. Pretty impressive for my big sister who hasn't even finished college." I froze. "Dad talks about my work?" "All the time," she laughed. "It's Eliza's division this, and Eliza's innovation that. Mom says she hasn't seen him this energized about the business in years." The revelation stunned me. My father, who had traded away my education without hesitation, now boasted about my accomplishments to my sister. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the complicated satisfaction it produced. I had succeeded not because of his support, but despite its absence, yet now he claimed pride in that success. Our conversation shifted to Rebecca's plans for the coming year. As we spoke, I realized something had changed in our relationship as well. The subtle tension I had carried since the college fund decision had eased. I no longer saw her as the unwitting beneficiary of my sacrifice, but simply as my sister, following her own path with different strengths and challenges. When we ended the call, I remained at my desk, staring out at the darkened production floor, beyond my office windows. The manufacturing equipment stood silent at this late hour, but in the morning, it would again produce components that were changing how buildings generated power. Components I had envisioned, designed, and brought to market. Wharton would have taught me business theory, connected me with influential classmates, and provided a prestigious credential. But this, creating something tangible, building a team that manufactured products that mattered, had taught me something no classroom could. I had learned to transform adversity into opportunity through relentless focus and strategic patience. The following Monday, an unexpected visitor arrived at Meridian. Victor Coleman, CEO of Horizont Energy, one of the largest renewable infrastructure investment firms in the country, requested a tour of our facility. Such high-level visits were typically handled by my father and our sales director, but this time, my father delegated the responsibility to me. "Coleman specifically asked to see the renewable energy division," he explained. "He's familiar with your mounting systems from multiple installations. Handle it personally." I spent the morning walking Coleman through our production floor, explaining our manufacturing processes and quality control measures. He asked insightful questions about material selection, design philosophy, and scaling capacity. After the tour, we settled in our conference room for a more detailed discussion. "I'll be direct, Ms. Kincaid," Coleman said once we were seated. "Horizont is impressed with what you've built here. Your solutions are elegant, cost-effective, and consistently reliable, exactly what this rapidly growing sector needs." "Thank you," I replied carefully, sensing something significant beneath his praise. "We're expanding our vertical integration strategy," he continued. "Currently, we finance and develop solar projects through various partnerships, but we're moving to to control more of the supply chain directly. Your mounting systems would be a key component in that strategy. I maintained my professional demeanor despite my racing thoughts. Are you proposing a substantial purchase agreement? Coleman smiled slightly. I'm proposing something more comprehensive. Horizont would like to acquire Meridian Manufacturing, with particular interest in your renewable energy division. The statement hung in the air between us. Acquisition had never been discussed as a potential outcome of our expansion into renewable energy. Meridian was my father's life's work, built over 3 decades of relentless effort. The idea of it being absorbed into a larger corporation seemed impossible. I appreciate your interest, I said neutrally, but acquisition decisions would require board-level discussions. I'm not authorized to comment on such matters. Of course, Coleman acknowledged. I've already sent the formal proposal to your father and board, but I wanted to meet you personally. He leaned forward slightly. Your division is the primary driver of our interest. We see significant potential for expansion with proper capital investment and integration into our project pipeline. And the existing leadership team? I asked, the question forming before I could fully consider its implications. Would be a valuable asset, he replied diplomatically, particularly the innovative vision behind these products. He was referring to me, I realized. Horizont wasn't just interested in our technology. They were interested in the person who had conceived and implemented it. The recognition should have been flattering, but instead it created a knot of conflicting emotions. If Meridian was acquired, what would that mean for my future? For my father's legacy? For the team I had built? After Coleman departed, promising further discussions in the coming weeks, I immediately sought out my father. His office door was closed, unusual in the middle of a workday. His assistant informed me he had canceled his afternoon appointments and gone home early, another anomaly in his typically rigorous schedule. I returned to my own office, unable to focus on regular work while such a momentous possibility hung over the company. By 5:30, I made a decision. Grabbing my car keys, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in nearly 8 months. My mother answered the door, surprise evident on her face. Eliza, we weren't expecting you. I need to speak with Dad, I said directly. Is he home? She nodded, her expression concerned. He's in his study. He came home early today, said he needed to think. I moved past her toward the familiar door at the end of the hallway. After a brief knock, I entered without waiting for a response. My father sat behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, a thick document open before him. Horizont's acquisition proposal, I assumed. He looked up, not entirely surprised by my appearance. I expected you might come. You received Coleman's proposal. It wasn't a question. Yes. He removed his glasses and set them carefully on the desk. They're offering $42 million for Meridian, plus performance incentives based on the renewable division's growth over the next 3 years. The figure stunned me. Meridian was successful, certainly, but I had never considered its market value in such concrete terms. $42 million would represent a transformative amount for my father, who owned 72% of the company's shares. Are you considering it? I asked, taking a seat across from him. I'm reviewing the terms, he replied, his tone neutral. It's a substantial offer. Meridian is your life's work, I said carefully. You built it from nothing. Something flickered across his face. Pride, perhaps, or nostalgia. Yes, but every business reaches crossroads. Staying independent limits our growth potential. Horizont offers global distribution, integrated project opportunities, capital for expansion. His pragmatic assessment surprised me. I had expected an emotional rejection of the very idea of selling. Instead, he was evaluating it as a strategic business decision. And what would happen to the company? To the employees? To me, I didn't add. The proposal includes 2-year employment guarantees for all current staff, he said, and specific provisions for the leadership team. He held my gaze steadily. Particularly for the Director of Renewable Energy Solutions, who would become Vice President of Product Development for the combined entity, reporting directly to their Chief Innovation Officer. The implication was clear. In an acquisition scenario, I would be promoted, potentially with greater resources and opportunities than Meridian could provide independently. My career would accelerate significantly, bypassing years of gradual advancement. You're actually considering this, I said, the realization dawning fully. I'm 62, Eliza, he replied simply. The company needs its next chapter. The question is what form that takes. We talked for nearly 2 hours, analyzing the proposal from multiple angles: financial, strategic, operational. He shared insights about Horizon's reputation and business practices gleaned from industry contacts. I outlined potential integration challenges and opportunities based on my knowledge of our production systems and team dynamics. Throughout the conversation, something shifted between us. We weren't father and daughter discussing family business. We were business partners evaluating a critical decision with clear-eyed objectivity. For the first time, he sought my opinion not as a courtesy, but as essential input to his decision-making process. As our discussion concluded, he gathered the proposal documents into a neat stack. The board meets next Tuesday to discuss this. Formally. They'll want your assessment of how the renewable division would integrate with Horizon's existing operations. I nodded, already mentally outlining the analysis I would prepare. I'll have it ready. He stood, signaling our meeting had ended. As I rose to leave, he added, Whatever direction this takes, Eliza, what you've built here has created this opportunity. Remember that. The acknowledgement was simple but profound. My father was crediting me with creating value that had attracted this significant acquisition interest. After years of struggling for recognition, the validation felt both satisfying and strangely insufficient. I didn't need his approval anymore. I had proven my worth to myself. Driving back to my apartment, I considered the potential outcomes. If Meridian remained independent, I would continue building my division, eventually moving into broader leadership roles. If the acquisition proceeded, I would have expanded resources but less autonomy, working within a larger corporate structure. Both paths offered opportunities, but neither fully aligned with the vision that had begun forming in my mind over recent months. A vision I hadn't yet articulated, even to myself. When I reached my apartment, instead of going inside, I remained in my car, staring at the darkened windows of my rarely occupied living space. My life had become entirely defined by work. First, by the desperate need to prove myself, then by the genuine passion for what I was creating. But was this sustainable? Was it enough? I pulled out my phone and did something I rarely allowed myself. I checked my personal email, the account I had created for college applications years ago, and now used primarily for non-work correspondence. Among the promotional messages and newsletters sat an email from Oak Ridge Community College. My academic advisor had been reaching out regularly, encouraging me to complete the associate's degree I had been slowly accumulating credits toward during night classes. Only 2 courses remaining for graduation, the message reminded me. Registration for summer term closes Friday. I stared at the screen, a plan gradually crystallizing. Whatever happened with Meridian, independence or acquisition, I needed to complete something I had started for myself, not for my father or the company. My education had been derailed but not defeated. Perhaps it was time to recommit to that path, even as the business decisions unfolded. The following morning, I registered for my final 2 courses before heading to the office. The simple act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been set aside during the relentless focus on Meridian's renewable energy division. Whatever came next, I would face it not just as a business leader but as someone who finished what she started, regardless of obstacles. The week leading up to the board meeting passed in a blur of preparation. I developed comprehensive analyses of how our renewable division could integrate with Horizon's operations, identifying synergies and potential challenges. Simultaneously, I outlined an alternative growth strategy if Meridian remained independent, including international expansion opportunities and complementary product development. The morning of the board meeting, I dressed with particular care, a tailored charcoal suit that projected both confidence and seriousness. As I drove to the office, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt genuine equanimity about the outcome. My worth wasn't determined by my father's company or his approval. I had built something valuable through my own efforts, and that value would persist regardless of organizational structure. The board meeting took place in our largest conference room, overlooking the manufacturing floor through a wall of windows. Sunshine streamed in, illuminating the polished oak table where 12 people now sat. The 8 board members, my father as chairman and CEO, our corporate counsel, our CFO, and me. Conspicuously present was an empty chair at the far end, reserved for Victor Coleman, who would join us for the second portion of the meeting to discuss Horizon's acquisition proposal. I presented my analysis with methodical precision, outlining both the integration potential with Horizon and our independent growth strategy. The numbers spoke clearly. Our renewable energy division had grown 218% year over year, with forecasts suggesting continued expansion if properly capitalized. The patents we'd secured for our specialized mounting systems provided significant competitive advantage that would maintain our market position for at least 3 years. In summary, I concluded, Meridian faces 2 viable paths forward. Integration with Horizon offers immediate capital injection, expanded market access, and potential acceleration of our growth trajectory. Independence preserves our decision-making, autonomy, and potentially greater long-term value creation if we can secure adequate growth capital through other means. The board's questions were pointed but fair. What competitive responses could we anticipate? How dependent was our growth on government renewable energy incentives? What succession planning existed for key leadership positions? I answered each query directly, acknowledging uncertainties where they existed rather than presenting false certainty. Throughout my presentation, my father remained largely silent, allowing the board's discussion to unfold without his influence. Only when the financial aspects were examined did he interject with clarifying comments about our current capitalization and lending relationships. After nearly an hour of discussion, our corporate secretary announced Victor Coleman's arrival. The energy in the room shifted perceptibly as he entered. Tall, confident, impeccably dressed in a suit that casually signaled wealth without ostentation. He carried a slim leather portfolio and moved with the easy assurance of someone accustomed to negotiating 9-figure deals over lunch. "Thank you for the opportunity to discuss our proposal," Coleman began after introductions. Horizon sees tremendous potential in combining our project development expertise with Meridian's manufacturing excellence, particularly in the renewable energy division. What followed was a masterclass in corporate acquisition strategy. Coleman outlined synergies, market expansions, and financial projections with persuasive clarity. He emphasized Horizon's commitment to maintaining Meridian's workforce and culture while providing resources for accelerated growth. The $42 million purchase price, he explained, reflected not just current operations, but the strategic value of our patented technologies and growing market position. "We're particularly impressed by the innovation coming from your renewable energy division," Coleman added, nodding slightly in my direction. "The leadership talent behind that success would be instrumental in our combined future." The pointed reference wasn't subtle. Horizon wanted Meridian's technology and manufacturing capacity, but they also wanted me, the architect of the division that had attracted their interest. My father's expression remained neutral, but I caught the slight tightening of his jaw. At Coleman's implication. After Coleman's presentation, the board asked him to step out while they continued their deliberation. As the door closed behind him, the real conversation began. The offer is generous, our CFO acknowledged, well above typical valuation multiples for manufacturing businesses of our size. Because they're not buying a typical manufacturing business, my father said, his first substantive comment of the meeting. They're buying innovation, market position, and future potential. He turned toward me. Innovation that wouldn't exist if we had maintained our traditional focus. The acknowledgement hung in the air, significant in its directness. Without saying it explicitly, my father was crediting me with creating the value that had attracted Horizon's interest. The board discussion continued for another 40 minutes, weighing financial considerations against strategic independence. Throughout, I remained professionally detached, providing analysis without advocating for either outcome. This wasn't personal. It was business, a principle my father had instilled in me since childhood. Finally, the board chairman called for a preliminary vote to gauge the room before making a formal decision. Those favoring further exploration of the acquisition offer? 5 hands raised, including our CFO and 2 outside directors. Those favoring remaining independent with additional growth investment? 4 hands, including my father's. Eliza, the chairman said, "You haven't indicated a preference." All eyes turned to me. I had carefully avoided revealing my position, focusing instead on providing objective analysis. Now, placed on the spot, I could no longer maintain that neutrality. I believe both paths offer significant potential, I began carefully. But ultimately, I favor independence, if we can secure the necessary growth capital. My father's eyebrows lifted slightly, the closest thing to surprise he ever displayed in professional settings. "Interesting," the chairman observed. "Would you elaborate on your reasoning?" I straightened in my chair, aware that my next words would carry particular weight. Meridian has only begun to realize the potential of our renewable energy technology. The current valuation, while generous by standard metrics, doesn't fully capture the growth trajectory we're establishing. If we remain independent and properly capitalize our expansion, I believe the company's value in 3 years would substantially exceed Horizon's current offer. The chairman nodded thoughtfully. And the risk of remaining independent in a rapidly consolidating market? Real, I acknowledged, but calculated. Our patent portfolio provides meaningful protection, and our customer relationships are increasingly strategic rather than transactional. The greater risk, in my assessment, would be surrendering control before fully developing our market position. The board deliberated further, with opinions shifting as members considered this perspective. Eventually, the chairman called for a final vote. The result was 7-2 in favor of remaining independent, with the caveat that management would develop a comprehensive growth capital strategy within 60 days. As the meeting concluded, Coleman was invited back to receive our decision. My father, who had been uncharacteristically reserved throughout the proceedings, finally took the lead. "Mr. Coleman, we appreciate Horizon's interest and generous offer," he said, his tone respectful but firm. "After careful consideration, our board has decided that Meridian's best path forward is continued independence. We believe our current trajectory will create greater long-term value for our shareholders, employees, and customers." Coleman absorbed this news with professional grace, though I caught the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "I understand. Though obviously I'm disappointed. The offer remains open for reconsideration for the next 90 days. He gathered his materials and stood to leave, then paused. "Ms. Kincaid," he said, turning to me, "should your career plans ever involve a change of scenery, Horizon would welcome a conversation." The implication was clear. If they couldn't acquire Meridian, they might attempt to acquire its talent. I thanked him politely without providing any opening for further discussion. After Coleman departed, the board members filtered out, leaving only my father and me in the conference room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Through the windows, we could see the manufacturing floor below, workers assembling the products that had built this company. Finally, my father broke the silence. "You surprised me," he said quietly. "I expected you to favor the acquisition." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question carefully. "The offer included specific provisions for your advancement. Vice president at Horizont would represent significant career progression and considerably higher compensation. At the cost of what we're building here," I replied. "This is only the beginning. What we've created has potential beyond immediate financial returns." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "That sounds remarkably like something I might have said 30 years ago. Perhaps we're not entirely different after all." His expression turned contemplative. "The growth capital discussion begins tomorrow. 8 a.m., my office. We have 60 days to secure funding for the next phase of expansion." I nodded, already mentally outlining potential approaches. "I'll be ready." As he gathered his materials to leave, he paused. "Eliza." I looked up. "Your analysis today was excellent. Thorough, objective, strategic. The board relied heavily on your assessment." Coming from him, this qualified as effusive praise. "Thank you. You've become an exceptional business leader," he continued, surprising me with the directness of the compliment. "With or without the education that was promised to you." The reference to the college fund decision was as close to acknowledgement as he had ever come. Not quite an apology, but a recognition of what had been taken from me. Before I could formulate a response, he added, "Though I understand you're completing your associate's degree this summer." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. "How did you know that?" "I'm still on the Community College Foundation Board. Your name appeared on the pending graduates list." Something almost like approval crossed his face. "Persistence is a valuable trait. Finishing what you start, regardless of obstacles." With that observation, he left, leaving me alone in the conference room with the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows and the distant sound of manufacturing equipment below. The following weeks were consumed with developing our growth capital strategy. We explored multiple options: private equity investment, strategic partnerships, expanded lending facilities. I threw myself into this work with characteristic intensity, often staying at the office until midnight, preparing financial models and investor presentations. The growth capital discussion revealed something unexpected. My father was considering his own succession planning. He was 62, in good health, but increasingly contemplating the next phase of Meridian's leadership. These considerations remained largely implicit in our discussions, emerging in comments about long-term governance and leadership continuity. I filed these observations away, focusing instead on the immediate priority of securing expansion funding. In the midst of these intense preparations, an unexpected email arrived from Rebecca. She was coming home for a long weekend and wanted to have dinner, just the two of us, without our parents. We arranged to meet at Luciano's, an Italian restaurant downtown that had been a special occasion spot during our childhood. When I arrived, Rebecca was already seated, looking sophisticated, in a way that momentarily startled me. My mental image of her remained frozen as my slightly awkward younger sister, but the woman before me exuded confident poise. She rose to embrace me warmly. "You look exhausted," she observed as we settled into our seats. "Busy time at work." I replied, realizing I hadn't taken a dinner break away from the office in weeks. "So I've heard. Dad mentioned you rejected some huge offer to buy the company." She tilted her head curiously. "That must have been intense." I provided a simplified overview of the Horizont situation, careful to focus on business considerations rather than personal implications. Rebecca listened attentively, asking surprisingly insightful questions about the strategic reasoning behind our decision. "You know," she said as our entrees arrived, "I used to think we were completely different. You were the serious, strategic one, and I was the dreamy artist. But I've realized we're more similar than I thought. We're both building things, just in different domains. The observation struck me as unexpectedly perceptive. I suppose that's true. She twirled pasta thoughtfully. There's something I need to tell you, and I wanted to do it in person. She took a deep breath. I'm not going back to finish my degree at Barnard. I blinked in surprise. What? Why not? I thought you loved it there. I did. The experience was incredible. But I've been offered a position at Northlight Publishing as an assistant acquisitions editor. It's entry-level, but with a clear advancement path. Her expression was a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. I know Mom and Dad will be disappointed that I'm not completing my degree, but this opportunity is too perfect to pass up. I studied her face, recognizing the determined set of her jaw, the same expression I saw in the mirror when facing difficult decisions. What did they say when you told them? I haven't yet, she admitted. I wanted to talk to you first. You've always understood me better than they do. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rebecca, who had received the college fund and parental support that had been denied to me, was now choosing to leave college before graduation. Meanwhile, I was completing my associate's degree through night classes while working full-time. Do you want my advice? I asked carefully. Please. Make the decision that's right for you, not for them. If this publishing position aligns with your goals and provides the growth you want, then pursue it with confidence. I took a sip of water, considering my next words. Just understand that choices create consequences, both positive and negative. Be prepared for those consequences, whatever they may be. Rebecca nodded slowly. That's why I admire you, Eliza. You've always been so clear-eyed about your choices, even when the path wasn't easy. If only she knew how those choices had been shaped by circumstances beyond my control. But that revelation would serve no purpose now, particularly when she was facing her own crossroads. Will you support me when I tell them? She asked, vulnerability edging her voice. Of course, I replied without hesitation. Always. As our dinner concluded, I realized something had shifted in our relationship. We were no longer defined primarily as sisters with different paths, but as adults making our own decisions, supporting each other even when those decisions diverged from family expectations. There was something profoundly healing in this evolution. The following weekend, Rebecca told our parents about her decision to accept the publishing position. Their reaction was mixed. Disappointment about the interrupted degree, cautious support for the career opportunity. Throughout the difficult conversation, I provided quiet but firm support for her autonomy, never mentioning the irony of their concern over her education when mine had been sacrificed years earlier. After that family discussion, I drove back to my apartment feeling strangely liberated. The contrast between their reaction to Rebecca's choice and their past treatment of mine had crystallized something important. I had built my current success without their backing, through my own determination and capability. This realization didn't erase the past hurt, but it transformed it into something approaching pride in my resilience. 2 days later, I presented our comprehensive growth capital recommendation to the board. After exploring multiple options, we proposed a hybrid approach, a combination of expanded bank financing and a strategic minority investment from Greenfield Restoration, our first client in the renewable energy space. This structure would provide the necessary capital while preserving management control and strategic independence. The board approved our recommendation unanimously. As the meeting concluded, several directors specifically commended my analysis and strategic thinking. My father, observing these interactions from his position at the head of the table, maintained his typical reserve, but I caught the slight nod of approval as the final vote was recorded. In the corridor afterward, he paused briefly beside me. The implementation begins tomorrow, he said simply. Lead it. 3 words that represented a significant shift in authority, from oversight to leadership, from proving my value to exercising it. I accepted this expanded responsibility, with the same quiet determination that had characterized my journey thus far. That evening, driving home through the summer twilight, I realized I had reached an inflection point, professionally, personally, and in my complex relationship with my father. The girl whose college fund had been reallocated, whose dreams had been deferred, had methodically built something valuable through persistent effort and strategic vision. The path ahead still held challenges, but I faced them now from a position of earned strength rather than desperate determination. Whatever came next, I would meet it on my own terms, shaped by adversity, but no longer defined by it. The implementation of our growth strategy began immediately. With the board's approval secured, we entered a period of intense activity, finalizing terms with Greenfield Restoration for their $3.5 million strategic investment, negotiating expanded lending facilities with our primary bank, and developing detailed expansion plans for the renewable energy division. I coordinated these parallel work streams with methodical precision, determined to demonstrate that the board's confidence in our independent path was justified. The strategic investment from Greenfield was particularly significant. Beyond the capital infusion, it represented a validation of our technology and market approach by a sophisticated industry player. Their CEO, Marcus Reynolds, had become an unexpected ally in our growth journey, recognizing early the potential of our specialized mounting systems for their historic building renovation projects. "Your technology solved problems we'd been struggling with for years," Reynolds explained during our partnership negotiations. "This investment isn't just financial. It's strategic alignment with innovation we believe will transform the sector." His words carried weight within the industry. When news of Greenfield's investment in Meridian became public, it generated inquiries from additional potential clients and partners. Our credibility in the renewable energy space, already growing through successful projects, received substantial enhancement from this vote of confidence. Throughout this intense period, my father maintained his characteristic reserve in public settings. In board updates and management meetings, he presented a united front on our strategic direction while allowing me to lead the detailed implementation discussions. Behind closed doors, however, our working relationship evolved subtly. He began consulting me on matters beyond the renewable energy division, seeking my perspective on broader company decisions, particularly those with long-term strategic implications. During one such private discussion in late August, reviewing preliminary designs for manufacturing floor reconfiguration, he mentioned something unexpected. "The annual Industry Leadership Conference is next month in Chicago," he said, seemingly as an aside. "I've attended for 26 consecutive years, given the keynote twice." I nodded, familiar with the event's significance in our industry calendar, though I had never attended. It was an invitation-only gathering of manufacturing executives, typically limited to C-suite leadership. "I've nominated you to attend in my place this year," he continued, watching my reaction carefully. The board supported the recommendation unanimously. The statement caught me completely off guard. This conference represented one of the most prestigious industry networking events, attendance typically reserved for company presidents and CEOs. "You've always attended," I said, processing the implications of this deviation from tradition. "Yes," he acknowledged, "but transitions are necessary. You should begin establishing your own relationships with industry leadership." The word transitions hung between us, loaded with unspoken meaning. This wasn't merely about a conference, it was about succession planning, about positioning me as Meridian's future leadership. My father wasn't making any explicit promises, but the signal to both me and the industry would be unmistakable. "I appreciate the opportunity," I said carefully. "I'll represent Meridian effectively." Something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "I have no doubt about that. Your panel presentation is already confirmed. Next generation manufacturing leadership, integrating traditional excellence with emerging markets." Appropriate, I thought. The conference represented another significant milestone, recognition not just within Meridian, but within the broader industry. I approached the preparation with characteristic thoroughness, developing a presentation that balanced respect for manufacturing traditions with vision for emerging opportunities. The panel would place me alongside CEOs from companies 5 times Meridian's size, an opportunity for visibility I fully intended to maximize. 2 weeks before the conference, as these preparations intensified, I received an unexpected visitor at my office. Thomas Wells, our former production manager who had been terminated for theft 8 years earlier, appeared without appointment, somehow bypassing our front desk security protocols. "Ms. Kincaid," he said, standing in my doorway with an unsettling smile. Or should I say, the heir apparent. I maintained my composure despite my surprise at his presence. "Mr. Wells, this is unexpected. How did you get past reception?" "People remember me here," he replied vaguely. "I worked for this company for 12 years before your intervention. Before your theft was discovered," I corrected calmly, reaching discreetly for my desk phone. "What do you want? I'm extremely busy." "I've been following Meridian's success," he said, stepping further into my office uninvited. "Particularly your renewable energy division. Quite the achievement for someone who never even finished college." The barb was deliberate, meant to provoke a reaction. I didn't give him the satisfaction. "If you have business to discuss, please make an appointment through proper channels," I replied evenly. "Otherwise, I'll need to call security." His expression hardened. "Your father destroyed my career. I spent 8 years rebuilding my reputation, and just when I finally secured a position with Hartwell Manufacturing, guess what appeared in my background check? Formal theft accusations, documented by Meridian Manufacturing." I studied him carefully, assessing the potential threat. Wells had been bitter after his termination, but this visit, years later, suggested something beyond lingering resentment. "The documentation reflected factual events," I said simply. "If that's creating professional difficulties for you, perhaps the issue lies with your actions rather than our records." His face flushed. "I've learned things over the years, Eliza. About your family, about this company. Things that might interest certain people." The implied threat hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, my assistant appeared in the high doorway, clearly concerned by the unauthorized visitor. "Everything okay, Ms. Kincaid?" she asked, her hand already on her phone, ready to call security. "Mr. Wells was just leaving," I replied without breaking eye contact with him. "Please escort him to the exit." Wells smiled thinly. "We'll continue this conversation another time." After he departed, I spent several minutes considering the implications of his visit. The threat seemed vague, possibly empty posturing from a disgruntled former employee. Still, his specific mention of my family suggested he might have uncovered something he believed could be damaging. I made a note to alert our legal department about the incident, but decided against mentioning it to my father immediately. With the conference approaching and multiple critical projects underway, additional concerns seemed unnecessary unless Wells made more specific threats. The Chicago Manufacturing Conference arrived during a perfect autumn week, the city showcasing itself against clear blue skies and comfortable temperatures. I checked into the downtown hotel where the event was being held, immediately noticing the predominant demographic, men in their 50s and 60s, most of whom had likely known my father for decades. As one of the few women under 40, and certainly among the youngest division leaders present, I prepared myself for the inevitable scrutiny. The opening reception that evening confirmed my expectations. As I navigated the crowded ballroom, I encountered a mixture of reactions: genuine interest from forward-thinking executives, polite curiosity from some, and thinly veiled skepticism from others. I handled each interaction with professional confidence, discussing industry trends and Meridian's innovations without either apologizing for my youth or overcompensating with unnecessary assertiveness. "You must be James Kincaid's daughter," observed an older gentleman as I selected an appetizer from a passing tray. "Spitting image of him, especially around the eyes. Same intensity." "Eliza Kincaid," I confirmed, extending my hand. "Director of Renewable Energy Solutions at Meridian." "Walter Davidson, Precision Metalworks," he replied, his handshake firm. "Known your father for 30 years. Surprised he's not here? Never misses this conference." "He sent me as Meridian's representative this year," I explained simply. Davidson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Significant vote of confidence. Your division is the one making waves with those specialized solar mounting systems, right? Clever innovation." The conversation shifted to technical aspects of our designs, Davidson asking surprisingly detailed questions about material selection and load-bearing capabilities. I answered each query with precision, gradually earning what appeared to be genuine respect from the veteran manufacturer. "Your father built a hell of a company," Davidson commented as our conversation concluded. "Not always the easiest man to work with, mind you, but respected throughout the industry. Big shoes to fill." "I'm not trying to fill his shoes," I replied honestly. "I'm wearing my own." He laughed appreciatively. "Good answer. I'll be at your panel tomorrow. Interested to hear your perspective on where this industry is headed." The panel presentation the following morning exceeded my expectations. The moderator, initially prone to directing substantive questions to my male counterparts, quickly adjusted his approach when my early answers demonstrated deep technical knowledge and strategic insight. By the session's midpoint, the audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions about integrating renewable energy components into traditional manufacturing operations, exactly the transition I had led at Meridian. The most common mistake, I explained in response to one question, is treating renewable energy manufacturing as completely distinct from traditional industrial fabrication. The fundamentals remain constant: precision, quality control, supply chain management. The application evolves, but manufacturing excellence transcends specific products. This perspective resonated strongly with the room of manufacturing veterans, many of whom were struggling with similar strategic pivots in their own companies. After the panel concluded, I found myself surrounded by executives seeking continued conversation, exchanging business cards, and proposing potential collaborations. That evening, during the conference dinner, I was seated at a table with the association's board members, a placement typically reserved for the most influential attendees. The conversation ranged from tariff impacts on raw materials to automation advancements, with my contributions received as equal to those of CEOs, with decades more experience. As coffee was served, the association president approached our table. "Ms. Kincaid, a moment?" he asked, gesturing toward a quieter area nearby. Once we had stepped away from the group, he spoke frankly. "Your presentation this morning impressed a lot of people who aren't easily impressed. We're planning next year's conference, and I'd like to discuss the possibility of you delivering a featured address on manufacturing innovation in transitional markets." The invitation represented significant industry recognition, exactly the type of strategic positioning my father had intended by sending me in his place. "I'd be honored," I replied. Meridian's experience navigating this evolution offers valuable insights for others facing similar transitions. "Excellent," he nodded. "And please extend my regards to your father. His contributions to this association have been substantial over the years." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "He's built quite a legacy, one that appears to be in capable hands." The implied succession was becoming an increasingly common theme in these conversations, industry leaders assuming, without explicit confirmation, that I represented Meridian's future leadership. While flattering, these assumptions created a complex dynamic upon my return to the office. My father had made no formal announcements about succession planning, yet his decision to send me to the conference had clearly signaled something significant to industry insiders. Upon my return to Oak Ridge, I provided a detailed briefing on the conference outcomes, new relationships established, potential partnerships identified, competitive intelligence gathered. My father listened attentively, asking occasional clarifying questions but offering little immediate feedback. The association president mentioned next year's conference, I concluded. They've invited me to deliver a featured address on manufacturing innovation. My father nodded slightly. Appropriate recognition. Walter Davidson called me yesterday. Said you made quite an impression. We had an interesting conversation about material selection for load-bearing applications, I confirmed. He also said something about you wearing your own shoes, my father added, his expression unreadable. Apparently you're not trying to fill mine. I met his gaze steadily. I respect what you've built, but my path isn't about replication. It's about evolution, taking Meridian forward while honoring its foundations. For a long moment, he studied me silently. Then something unexpected happened. A genuine smile briefly transformed his typically reserved expression. Good, he said simply. That's exactly as it should be. With that enigmatic statement, our meeting concluded. As October progressed, I focused on implementing our growth strategy while completing my final community college courses. The expansion of our renewable energy production proceeded slightly ahead of schedule, with new equipment being installed and additional personnel hired and trained. The strategic investment from Greenfield had been finalized, providing both capital and enhanced industry credibility. Throughout this period of intense activity, Thomas Wells's strange visit remained in the back of my mind. I had alerted our legal department about the encounter, but no further contact had occurred. Still, his implied threat lingered uncomfortably, a reminder that past decisions sometimes created unexpected consequences. Mid-October brought the culmination of my community college journey. Completion of my final course requirements for my associate's degree in business administration. While modest compared to the Wharton education I had once anticipated, this achievement represented persistence and determination that I privately valued more than any external recognition. The official graduation ceremony wouldn't occur until December, but I received confirmation of degree completion on a Tuesday morning in late October. I sat at my desk, staring at the email with a sense of quiet accomplishment. This milestone belonged to me alone, funded by my own earnings, completed during precious evening hours carved from demanding workdays, pursued not because anyone expected it, but because I had refused to abandon my educational goals despite the obstacles placed in my path. That same afternoon, my father called an unexpected executive committee meeting. The timing seemed oddly coincidental with my degree completion, though I knew there was no way he could be aware of the email I had received only hours earlier. Nevertheless, a strange sense of anticipation followed me into the conference room. The executive committee meeting began precisely at 3 p.m., with an unusual energy pervading the room. My father sat at the head of the table, surrounded by department directors and our CFO. As everyone settled into their seats, I noticed an unfamiliar folder placed at each position, thick, cream-colored, with Meridian's logo embossed in silver on the cover. Before we address regular business, my father began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had defined his leadership for decades, I want to announce a significant organizational decision. He paused, his gaze moving deliberately around the table before settling on me. Effective January 1st, I will be stepping back from day-to-day operations at Meridian Manufacturing. I'll retain my board chairmanship, but will transition the CEO position to new leadership. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Despite his age, my father had never discussed retirement plans openly. His identity had always seemed inextricably linked with the company he had built. The board and I have spent considerable time evaluating succession options, he continued. Our decision was unanimous. He gestured toward the folders. Inside, you'll find the formal transition plan. Eliza Kincaid will assume the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective January 1st. The announcement landed with seismic impact. Despite the increasing signals over recent months, hearing the decision stated so definitively left me momentarily speechless. The other executives turned toward me with expressions ranging from shocked surprise to knowing acknowledgement. My father continued outlining the transition plan, department reporting structures, communication strategy for employees and clients, his ongoing role as board chairman. Throughout his explanation, I maintained my professional composure while processing the profound implications of this decision. At 32, I would become CEO of a company with over 200 employees and annual revenue exceeding $50 million. When the meeting concluded, the other executives offered congratulations as they filtered out, leaving my father and me alone in the conference room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of what had just occurred settled between us, both the professional recognition and the complex personal history that had preceded it. "Why now?" I finally asked. "The timing is strategically sound," he replied, ever the pragmatist. "The renewable energy expansion is underway, the greenfield investment is secured, and your industry recognition is growing. This positions both you and the company optimally." I nodded, acknowledging the business logic while recognizing he had sidestepped any personal aspects of the decision. "The board was truly unanimous?" "Yes." A hint of pride briefly softened his expression. "Your performance over the past year eliminated any reservations. The renewable energy division's success speaks for itself, as does your handling of the Horizont offer and the growth capital strategy." I absorbed this validation, allowing myself a moment to appreciate that my work had earned this recognition through demonstrable results rather than family connection. Still, questions lingered about the personal dimensions of this decision. 10 years ago, I said carefully, you told me I was the practical one, the strong one, that I could handle disappointment when Rebecca couldn't. I met his gaze directly. "Did you believe even then that I would eventually be sitting here?" My father's expression remained composed, but something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or reconsideration. "I believed you had potential," he acknowledged, "but I underestimated your determination." It wasn't an apology for the college fund decision, not exactly. But in its own way, it represented acknowledgement of both the obstacle he had placed in my path and my success in overcoming it. Coming from my father, this qualified as significant emotional recognition. "There's something else you should know," I said after a moment. "I completed my associate's degree requirements today. Official confirmation came this morning." Surprise, genuine and unfiltered, crossed his face. "You finished your degree? While managing the division and the expansion?" "I started something. I finished it," I replied simply. Even when the path changed. He nodded slowly, a new understanding passing between us. "The graduation is when?" "December 15th. But I don't expect—" "We'll be there," he interrupted with unusual definitiveness. "Your mother and I both." The transition announcement spread quickly throughout the company. Most employees received the news positively, particularly those in the renewable energy division who had witnessed my leadership directly. Others, especially long-serving staff from traditional departments, displayed more reserved reactions, not overtly negative, but watchful, waiting to see how this change would affect their established routines. My sister's response came via an excited phone call within hours of the public announcement. "CEO! Eliza, that's incredible!" Rebecca exclaimed. "Dad just called me with the news. He sounded proud, in his restrained way." "It's a significant opportunity," I replied, maintaining my typical professional demeanor despite her enthusiasm. "Oh, stop," she laughed. "This is me you're talking to. It's okay to admit you're thrilled. This is everything you've worked for." Her words gave me pause. Was this everything I had worked for? The title, the recognition, the vindication after being denied educational opportunities? Or had my motivations evolved along the way, becoming less about proving something to my father and more about building something meaningful through my own vision? It's satisfying, I acknowledged, but also sobering. 200 people's livelihoods will depend on my decisions. You'll be brilliant, Rebecca assured me. You always have been. Remember when we were kids and you created that elaborate business plan for my lemonade stand? Projected earnings, location analysis, pricing strategy. I was 8 and just wanted to make some pocket money, but you turned it into a proper enterprise. The memory made me smile. Even then, my analytical tendencies had been evident. We did make $47 that weekend. Exactly. And now you're going to run Dad's company. It's poetic justice, really. The phrase caught me off guard. What do you mean? A brief hesitation on the line suggested she realized she might have said too much. Oh, just that. You know, after everything with college and having to take the community college route while I got to go to Barnard, it seems right that you're getting this recognition now. My breath caught. You knew about the college fund? Another pause. I overheard Mom and Dad arguing about it years ago. Mom thought it wasn't fair to you, but Dad insisted you were stronger, that you could handle it better than I could. Her voice softened with guilt. I should have said something, but I was 18 and selfish and excited about New York. I'm sorry, Eliza. The revelation that Rebecca had known, had carried this awareness throughout our adult relationship, momentarily stunned me. Yet, strangely, I felt no anger toward her. We had both been young, caught in our father's decisional matrix, navigating the paths laid before us. It doesn't matter now, I said finally. We both found our ways. But in different directions, she pointed out. I left college for publishing. You fought your way up from nothing to become CEO. It's like we completely switched expectations. Her observation crystallized something I had been gradually realizing. The college fund decision, painful as it had been, had set me on a path I might never have discovered otherwise. The direct immersion in business operations, the necessity-driven innovation, the practical experience gained through daily challenges, these had shaped me into the leader I had become, perhaps more effectively than any academic program might have done. Life rarely follows the expected path, I reflected. But sometimes the unexpected route leads to better destinations. The weeks following the announcement became a careful balancing act, continuing to lead the renewable energy division while preparing for broader CEO responsibilities. My father maintained his typical demanding standards, but increasingly positioned himself as an advisor rather than final decision-maker. The dynamic between us evolved toward something resembling partnership, though never quite reaching the warmth of conventional father-daughter relationships. One crisp November morning, as we reviewed quarterly projections together, an unexpected visitor appeared at Meridian's reception. Our security manager knocked on my father's office door with unusual urgency. Mr. Kincaid, Ms. Kincaid, he began, clearly uncomfortable. Thomas Wells is in reception, demanding to speak with both of you immediately. He's making concerning statements about exposing the truth about the Kincaids to the local business journal. Security has contained the situation, but he's threatening to go public with some alleged information. My father's expression darkened. Wells? The production manager we terminated years ago for theft? Yes, I confirmed. He visited my office last month making vague threats. I notified legal but hadn't mentioned it to you yet, given everything else underway. My father studied me for a moment, then turned to the security manager. Have him escorted to the small conference room. We'll address this directly. Once we were alone again, he added, Wells always had a vindictive streak. Better to hear whatever. He's threatening than allow speculation to spread. We found Wells waiting in the conference room, a thin folder on the table before him, his expression a mixture of bitterness and smug anticipation. He stood as we entered, his gaze moving between us with undisguised hostility. "The Kincaids," he said derisively. "Father and daughter, Meridian's perfect leadership dynasty. How convenient." "State your purpose, Thomas," my father said coldly. "We have a company to run." Wells smiled unpleasantly. "Interesting choice of words. We have a company to run." He tapped the folder. "I've spent years piecing together the real Kincaid family story. Fascinating reading." "If you have accusations, make them directly," I said, maintaining a calm exterior despite growing concern about what he might have discovered. 8 years ago, Wells began, James Kincaid discovered I was selling materials to a competitor, fired me immediately, blacklisted me throughout the industry. Righteous punishment from the moral exemplar of Oak Ridge Manufacturing. His expression hardened. Meanwhile, his own daughter was denied her college education because he gave her money to his younger daughter. Hypocrite much, James? My father's face remained impassive, though I noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw. Family financial decisions are hardly comparable to employee theft, Thomas. Maybe not, Wells conceded. But the Oak Ridge business. Journal might find it interesting that the great James Kincaid forced his elder daughter to work minimum wage jobs while her sister attended an expensive private college. That the new CEO of Meridian Manufacturing has only a community college degree because her father took away her future. He turned to me. Did he ever even apologize, Eliza? The direct question caught me off guard. Had my father ever actually apologized for the college fund decision? There had been acknowledgments, implicit recognitions, even pride in how I had overcome the obstacle. But a straightforward apology? No. Before I could formulate a response, my father spoke. You believe this information has value, Thomas? That exposing private family matters would somehow damage Meridian? Wells leaned forward. I believe it shows your true character. The community respects you, but they don't know how you treat your own family, how you favor one child over another, how your new CEO got where she is not because of your support, but despite your obstruction. Throughout this exchange, I had been watching Wells carefully, assessing his true motivation. This wasn't really about exposing family dynamics. It was about revenge for his termination, about hurting my father's reputation in any way possible. Mr. Wells, I said evenly, what exactly do you want? His smile widened. Compensation for the career your father destroyed. $200,000. Seems reasonable for my silence. And there it was. Simple extortion disguised as righteous exposure. I glanced at my father, whose expression had shifted from concern to something approaching satisfaction. Wells had just transformed a potentially uncomfortable situation into a straightforward legal matter. Attempting to extort money from a company, executive, is a criminal offense, my father stated calmly. Our security team has recorded this entire conversation. You have 2 options, Thomas. Leave immediately and never contact anyone at Meridian again, or wait here while I call the police to report your extortion attempt. Wells' confidence faltered visibly. He hadn't anticipated this direct confrontation or the revelation that his threats had been recorded. He gathered his folder with trembling hands. This isn't over, he muttered, though the threat sounded hollow now. It is, I replied with quiet certainty. What you've learned about my educational path isn't a secret, Thomas. I'm proud of my associate's degree, earned while working full-time and building a division that now employs 27 people. If the Business Journal wants that story, they're welcome to it. The calm confidence of my response seemed to deflate him further. He had expected embarrassment, perhaps divisiveness between my father and me. Instead, he found unified rejection of his attempt at leverage. After security escorted him from the building, my father and I returned to his office in silence. Would it damage you? He asked finally once we were alone again. If the community knew about the college fund decision? I considered the question carefully. Not professionally, The renewable energy division's success speaks for itself. My leadership capabilities aren't defined by educational credentials. Nodded slowly. And personally? I've made peace with that history, I replied honestly. It shaped me, but it doesn't define me. For a long moment, he studied me, something unfamiliar crossing his expression. Regret, perhaps, or newfound respect. Finally, he spoke words I had never expected to hear. I was wrong, Eliza. About the college fund, about what you needed, about many things. The admission came with visible difficulty. You deserved the education promised to you. I made a decision that prioritized Rebecca's perceived fragility over your legitimate expectations. It was unfair. The acknowledgement, so long delayed, landed with surprising emotional weight. I had told myself for years that I no longer needed his apology, that I had moved beyond seeking his approval. Yet hearing these words, this recognition, of the injustice I had experienced, released something I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Thank you for saying that, I replied, my voice steady despite the emotion beneath it. He nodded once, a gesture that closed the topic while acknowledging its significance. We returned to business matters, reviewing the quarterly projections with our typical focus. But something had shifted between us, a barrier dismantled, a wound beginning to heal. The weeks leading to my official CEO appointment passed swiftly. On December 15th, as promised, both my parents attended my community college graduation ceremony. The event was modest compared to the Ivy League commencement I had once envisioned. But as I crossed the stage to receive my associate's degree, I felt genuine pride in the persistence it represented. My father, seated in the audience between my mother and sister, actually applauded. A public display of approval entirely out of character for him. Afterward, he shook my hand formally, then surprised me with an awkward but sincere embrace. You finished what you started, he said quietly, on your own terms. 2 weeks later, on December 31st, I stood in my father's office, soon to be my office, for the formal transition meeting. The company was closed for the holiday, the building quiet as we reviewed final documents and transfer protocols. Everything had been meticulously prepared, every detail considered with my father's characteristic thoroughness. As we concluded, he handed me a small wrapped package. A tradition, he explained. My father gave me a similar gift when I took over his welding shop 36 years ago. Inside was a beautifully crafted brass compass, heavy in my palm, with the Meridian logo engraved on its cover. I opened it to find the cardinal directions clearly marked, the needle spinning briefly, before settling on north. To remind you, he said, that leadership requires knowing your direction even when the path isn't clear. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Throughout my journey, from the disappointed college applicant to hardware store employee to inventory, clerk to division director to now CEO, I had maintained my orientation despite obstacles and detours. The compass represented not just leadership philosophy, but recognition of the internal guidance that had brought me to this moment. As the new year dawned, I assumed the leadership of Meridian Manufacturing, not as my father's heir, but as an executive who had earned the position through demonstrated capability and vision. The company I now led was evolving, with the renewable energy division I had built representing its fastest-growing segment and most promising future direction. My parents' decision to give my college fund to Rebecca had fundamentally altered my path, creating hardship and opportunity in equal measure. The obstacles placed before me had forged resilience and determination that might never have developed in the comfortable progression from Wharton to corporate career that I had once expected. 10 years after that painful conversation in my father's home office, I now sat in his former chair at Meridian's headquarters, leading the company he had built and transforming it for a new era. The inheritance I had received wasn't what anyone had anticipated. Not wealth or privilege or predetermined advantage, but the opportunity to prove my capabilities against genuine adversity. And in the end, that proved more valuable than any college fund could have been. I hadn't just recovered from my parents' decision. I had transformed it into the foundation for something greater than anyone could have predicted. The company was now mine, not by gift, but by achievement. The most meaningful form of ownership possible. As for my father, our relationship had evolved beyond the painful history that once defined it. Not into conventional warmth, perhaps, but into something approaching mutual respect and cautious connection. The acknowledgement of past injustice had opened possibilities for a different future, one built on recognition of both our similarities and our differences. My journey from rejected daughter to company CEO wasn't a story of revenge, but of resilience. Proof that determination can transform obstacles into stepping stones, that denied opportunities sometimes create unexpected paths to greater achievements than originally imagined. If you've enjoyed this story of resilience and unexpected triumph, please subscribe to my channel for more inspiration and insights. Every week, I share stories that remind us that setbacks often contain hidden opportunities, and that our greatest challenges can become the foundation for our most meaningful successes. Hit that subscribe button to join our community of forward thinkers, who understand that life's detours sometimes lead to the most rewarding destinations. And remember, sometimes the inheritance we never expected becomes the gift that truly defines us.